I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Chou, who by training is a computer scientist and electrical engineer. Tim is really one of the acknowledged leaders in, in cloud computing, artificial intelligence. He served as president of cloud computing at a small company called Oracle, which some of you may have heard of. And he's also teaches on cloud computing and a variety of other topics at Stanford. I've been lucky to hear Tim speak a couple of times and just really appreciative of his newest passion project, which is really at the intersection of health technology and health equity, which I think has been a consistent theme throughout this presentation. And so he's going to talk about the Moonshot that he's been working on after he retired from his gig at Oracle on how to improve communications between healthcare providers and patients all over the world. So thank you, Tim, for coming to talk.
Thanks. See if I can master the slide thing here. Okay. First of all, Hanmin, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I've learned a lot about Dr. Harrison, so I hope I can deliver a Trailblazer talk as trailblazy as he has been. And thank you all for being here today. I'm going to talk about the Pediatric Moonshot. Our mission is to reduce healthcare inequity, lower cost, improve patient outcomes for kids locally, rurally, and globally. How are we going to do this? By creating privacy-preserving, real-time AI applications based on access to data from all 1 million healthcare machines in all 500 children's hospitals in the world. I figure it's a big enough mission, right? Somebody once told me, said, you can work on small problems or big problems. They all take the same effort, so why not work on big problems? So here we are working on a big problem. Before I get started, should I use this thing? Oh, good. I thought I'd, talk about long life. So this is actually taken from a temple in Kyoto, Japan. It's believed to be over 500 years old. It actually contains the secrets for long life. So since I'm in a medical community, I see you're all writing these down. Okay, so you're not reading Chinese yet. So here's the translation. You're supposed to eat more vegetables and less meat. You're supposed to have more sleep and less worry, more action and less words. And the one I've always been amused by, the more bathing, less clothing. I suppose if you're a Buddhist monk 500 years ago, I mean, what was the entertainment, right? So hopefully, if nothing else, I teach you a couple lessons for long life in your personal life. Just by way of introduction, as Hanmin already said, I have had a long career in the world of software. I actually came to Silicon Valley out of graduate school to work at one of the original Silicon Valley startups called Tandem Computers, for those of you who've been around for a while. And yeah, I actually did 2 stints at Oracle. I retired. I actually became chairman of a Y Combinator-like accelerator called Alchemist. Went on to a bunch of corporate boards. And as you will hear the story, about 3.5 years ago, kind of decided to come out of retirement to work on what I call my last great project. The origin of this is actually this class. So I taught computer architecture kind of as a part-time thing for a while I was working. And so I left that after I actually had to fly to Bali to do a sales kickoff meeting and get back to teach class. And I thought, that's a little dumb. So I gave myself a leave of absence. When I left Oracle, I was hanging around the department, the computer science department, and they said, oh, come back and teach. And I was like, God, that's a lot of work. And they said, well, do a seminar. I said, okay, I've been a manager a lot of years, great people, great opportunity, put them together. I don't have to do any work. So, which is a secret of management in case any of you have ever thought about it. So we started that class 15 years ago. I've had a who's who walk through there. CEOs of Salesforce, Zoom, more recently Intel, Franklin Templeton, etc. About 7 years ago, a strange student shows up in my class who wants to go out to breakfast. I sit down and I come to discover he has an MD, an MPH, an MBA, and he's chief of pediatric cardiology at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. So I don't know how many of you ever run across Anthony Chang, but Anthony, at the ripe old age of 52, decides to come back to Stanford, or come to Stanford, to get a master's degree in bioinformatics. It takes him 3.5 years to finish a 2-year program because, number one, he has no idea how to code. Number two, he actually has a real job. He's chief of pediatric cardiology. And number three, he decides at 52 to adopt an 18-month-old and a 6-month-old, and he's a bachelor. So I love telling Anthony's story because I always say it's never too late for any of us. Okay? So Anthony kind of adopted me into, I'll call it, your community. And so I started to learn things. This is actually his own story. A kid he's trying to provide consulting for in Myanmar. They want to share the ultrasound image with him. They can't. She actually dies on the operating room table. Later on, he does get to see the ultrasound. He says, hey, I could have told them what to do. Bring it a little closer to home. This is actually a friend of mine. This has happened about 2 years ago. The kid went in for optional shoulder surgery in a regional hospital in Arizona. There were complications. They decided to airlift him to CHLA. The CT scan, the CD-ROM never arrived. The kid died later that day. Now, obviously, no one knows would the CT scan have made any difference, but we all could agree it couldn't have hurt. So I got very interested. In fact, as you know, have heard the story, we started a lot in pediatric cardiology. I got connected to the Pediatric Pandemic Network people, and by virtue of that, ended up meeting Chris Newton, who heads up Eurotrauma. And so I'm talking to Chris about this. I go, you know, come on, all these systems are out there to be able to share Ombra Health, et cetera. And he goes, yeah, but they're too complicated. And we ended up spending a lot of time talking to folks at Howard Memorial in Willits, California, population 5,000. You don't have, I think for a lot of us, we think about, you know, global healthcare in terms of India or Africa. You don't have to go very far and realize, you know, the level of healthcare drops significantly, you know, in Salinas, by the way, or in Willits, California, who are still, to this very day, sending CD-ROMs either here or to Stanford or wherever. You all know this, pediatric clinical expertise is increasingly geographically concentrated in the 500 children's hospitals. Just to put some numbers to it, you know, there are 3 states in the union that have no pediatric emergency physicians in them at all. 60% of the rural counties in the United States have no pediatric expertise whatsoever. If you go global, you know, congenital heart disease is still the number 2 cause of death in kids in Mexico. India has we have 3,000 pediatric cardiologists. There are only 300 in India. In Rwanda, there's 1 guy. So you start thinking a lot about AI, and particularly for those more rare things out there. So I became aware of this condition called focal cortical dysplasia. You guys probably know more about it than I do, but it's a condition where there's a kid in Florida right now who is 13 years old. For the past 12 years, he has had epileptic seizures 2 to 3 times a day. At night, he wakes up screaming. They MRI imaged him very early on. They didn't see anything. He's been given every drug underneath the sun, some he could afford, some they couldn't. They ultimately are starting to talk about putting in electrical stimulation. They went in and re-MRI imaged him. And what the very interesting thing is, and that's actually not him, but that's an MRI image of the brain lesion, which if it is indeed that, they can surgically remove it and the kid is cured for life, which is like amazing. Now, the good news is there's only about 25,000 of these cases a year in the United States. So that's the good news. The bad news is obviously no one pediatric neuroradiologist sees enough cases. So that leads you, particularly if you're in the technology world, to think, boy, maybe AI in medicine could fundamentally reduce healthcare inequity, lower cost, and improve patient outcomes. If I could take the best and brightest, if I could take Han Min's brains and put it all across the planet, wouldn't that fundamentally change the equation?
I think you might have a lot of
Agreement? Okay. I thought these were your fans, Han Min. Okay. Anyway, short course on AI for those of you who have not been through this. And when I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about deep learning, which is all based on a technology referred to as neural networks. There was a competition launched at Stanford, actually, it's funny to think about, 2010, to try to compete or have a competition between humans and computers as who could recognize images more accurately. And when I'm talking about images, I'm talking about dogs and cats and trees and stuff like that. Well, you can see what has happened here over that, 7-year period, where humans have about a, 5% error rate, and you can see the computers beat humans. I mean, what is that, 4 or 5 years later? Obviously, this competition is not very relevant anymore. But what this pushed for everybody was realizing this core technology referred to as neural networks is really the game-changing technology. This is actually a chart that Jeff Dean, who runs Google Brain, put together. It's kind of interesting. Basically argues if you can feed these things more and more data with more and more compute, you will get near linear improvements in accuracy versus any other technique we've ever used. And since I never thought I'd hear a chancellor talking about AI and high performance computing, but right, so ChatGPT, which we all are familiar with, is really a great example of taking a ton of language data, Reddit files, whatever, New York Times, et cetera, and using that to train with, which is why it's remarkably good, even though we know there are disadvantages to it. Unfortunately, the same thing is not true for medical imaging as it has been for playing with text. This is actually a research report that Matt Lundgren, who used to be at Stanford, went off to Microsoft, and Pranav, who's over at Harvard, put together. Basically, the current state of the art of AI in medical imaging ain't so good. And basically what they end up saying time and time again is, yeah, it really worked great on the test data set, but as soon as you took it out into the real world, didn't work so good. Now, why is that? Remember I said the fundamental idea of neural nets is you have to give it more and more and more data. That's why even to this day, we see Waymo cars driving around pulling up data as you try to build autonomous cars. Well, this gives you a snapshot of how much data is made available today in the United States. So look, 3 states, we can all guess where they would be. You know, New York, Massachusetts, California provide most of the data, and you can guess the data is not coming from Willits, California, right? And if you go global, right, most of the data is US and China, fairly obviously, and then a smattering of other countries, none in Latin America, none in Africa, right, et cetera. So it is no wonder that where we are with the current state of the art. And so all of this gave me the impetus as COVID is descending on us. I'm thinking, are we just going to sit around watch Netflix all day or maybe do something useful? So I got a group of engineers, people I've worked with through the years, and we came together with a mission to reduce healthcare inequity, lower cost, improve patient outcomes for kids rurally and globally by creating privacy-preserving, real-time applications based on access to data. Remember the same conversation in all 1 million healthcare machines. And when I'm talking about a healthcare machine, I mean everything from ultrasound, CT, blood analyzer, gene sequencer, EKG, bedside monitor, et cetera, in all 500 children's hospitals in the world. So next thing I want to talk to you about is what we're doing technologically. I'm going to then talk to you about two major programs we are working on, one called Mercury and the other called Gemini. So let me start with a little bit of technology. We sat around and looked and said, well, none of the existing technology would serve to do the mission. So we needed to build, like the original Moonshot, a new rocket. So what we have engineered is a new type of cloud service. We call it an edge cloud or an in-the-building cloud service. So when I say the cloud service is in the building, what I'm saying is the server, the compute and storage, that server sitting in the building at Children's of Orange County. Now, why does it need to be in the building? Well, the only way you can talk to, and I'll just pick on ultrasound, the only way you can talk to the ultrasound is you have to be on the network in the building with the ultrasound. There's no other way to do this. So we had to engineer a way to go do that. Now, by the way, you can guess, the first time we talked to IT, they said NFW back to us. But we kind of knew that. I mean, you know, we've been around infrastructure for a long time. So we engineered over 30 security and privacy features. One of the core team members actually has 15 years of privacy law experience. And ultimately, right, we can put these in the building, which we can then twin, what we refer to as twin to the machine. So what I'm showing you here is a Philips ultrasound. But again, this whole architecture was built so that it could be EKGs, spectrometers, bedside monitors, et cetera. We further can make that data available and enriched. This is probably part of a longer conversation. I'm being sensitive to my time. To be able to defragment data at the source. Most of the challenges everybody's facing right now is trying to defragment it later in the cycle. Our point of view is let's keep it defragmented at the source. So there are a lot of ways in which we can do that, as well as protect the data to then make it available to an application, which could be a cardiology application, a neurology, a radiology application. We've extended the idea not only to twinning, because the sources of data are the machines, which I think have way more data than anything else does out there, but also to offline data, meaning data from PACSs, data from EMRs, et cetera. We've deployed this thing. We said we're engineers, so it's like, let's go do it. So we actually deployed edge zones in 8 children's hospitals on 3 continents and demonstrated, let me just go here, demonstrated the capability to do real-time image sharing between Children's Hospital of Orange County and Bambino Gesù, which is in Rome. That's actually a picture of Anthony. His oldest daughter has a congenital heart problem. He brought her in. That's Wyman Lai, who's head of cardiology. He imaged her in the lab in real time, 6,000 miles away. That's Dr. Alberto Tosi, got to see her heart, okay? So I said, that's the core technology. We've been focused in 2 major areas. For those of you who are old enough to remember the actual space program, we call them Mercury and Gemini. So the Mercury program is to enable a worldwide image sharing network to allow non-children's hospitals to share images with experts at children's hospitals. Remember my story about Anthony. Remember my friend Chris telling me this. And so we have engineered a super simple application. So just to imagine this is an X-ray machine at Willits Memorial or in a shopping center in Texas. The tech can come up to it, scan the QR code, up will pop the X-ray images from the past 24 hours. He can then select them and share with UCSF, Stanford, Davis, Shriners. So we're going to demonstrate all of this in the next couple of months with Howard Memorial and Chris and team to show people what it would be to build a nationwide network, which is where we are headed to, with phase 1 being bringing online 500 rural hospitals into the network. This will serve as a basis, because the technology is purely capable of doing this, to build a worldwide network, particularly focused around second opinions, where you do not have to be geographically near the expert. But as we said, hey, if you can share with a human expert, you can share with an AI expert. And so the question then becomes, how do I go build an AI cardiology, an AI in orthopedics, an AI in radiology? And so the second major prong has been the Gemini program, which is to build an AI research lab for children's medicine. Remember I said, hey, ChatGPT, tons of data, great accuracy, AI in medicine, not a whole lot of data. But the real point is there actually is a huge amount of data out there. We've done the back of the envelope. The 500 children's hospitals in the world, the Echo Lab, I'm not talking about any other source, generate at least 6 million terabytes of data a year. 6 million. Just to give you a sense of scale, the IDC data warehouse today has like 42 terabytes. I mean, if you're an AI researcher, that's gold. What I just showed you is gold. So the hard problem is everybody is headed, in fact, we heard it this morning, down to building giant data warehouses and trying to do this on a centralized basis, which is exactly how ChatGPT has done it. That works fine for text data. It's never going to work for medical imaging data, right? There's these studies, as you guys well know, are way bigger than just a bunch of text. And oh, by the way, what about data privacy rules? If you're thinking globally, what about data sovereignty rules, right? Trying to aggregate all the data in some central data center, it's just, there's no there. Instead, we believe that what we need to do is perfect the art of what is called federated learning, or how do I learn on the data without the data ever leaving the building? You may not realize this, but on your phone right now, Siri is learning. So Siri does not take your data and send it to the Apple Cloud, privacy, network, etc. What it's doing actually is when you're talking to it, it's learning and transmitting what it learns. The same thing, we've done preliminary work. We believe this can also work in AI medicine, which is we learn on the data in Orange County, in the Vatican, in Delaware, without the data ever leaving. So we are building what we call Gemini, which will be at 32 children's hospitals, all imaging machines twin, which will yield roughly 1,600 edge cloud servers out there to perfect the art of how do we use AI to build emergency medicine applications, neurology applications, orthopedic applications, radiology applications. Let me leave you with two things. So a lot of people are talking about money. So the funding challenge. I'd say right now, the current state of the world, in fact, this is effective towards the end of last year. I said, okay, we have the technology. We perfected enough of this. We know how to go do this. We actually know even how to set up the legal frameworks, the BAAs, the DUAs, all those sorts of things. We have a lot of support from the children's hospitals themselves, as you can gather in this. I have been funding all of our efforts to date, but this next step we have sized at $112 million. This may not be news to you, but the venture capital community could care less about pediatric healthcare. They're much more interested in old rich people than they are in kids, which is okay. I understand. I'm not going to the children's hospitals. I did spend a little time with your former CEO, Mike Anderson, understanding children's hospital economics, and it's pitiful. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but we're not going to the children's hospitals. And oh, by the way, if it's not obvious, we are building a network. And when you build a network, you cannot do this one node at a time. You've got to do it across a bunch of nodes. You may not be familiar with this, but the internet was not started commercially. The United States government, under an agency called ARPA, funded the initial backbone of the internet to connect research institutions together. So we are adopting the same strategy, and good news, you may all have heard about this new thing called ARPA-H. So we are talking to ARPA Health. USDA is very interesting as a potential person to go talk to. NIH, HHS, et cetera. We've just opened dialogues in the EU and early discussions with the government of Singapore. Because when you think about it, we're building fundamental infrastructure. It actually makes sense for governments to fund fundamental infrastructure. The other major area we're going into is corporate sponsorship, one that I'm a little bit more familiar with because I've lived in corporate world forever. So I had some fun with my friends at Juniper Networks, and I said, hey, you guys spent like $1 million to put a logo on a Formula One race car. And they went, well, actually, it was more than that. I went, okay, good. You're getting my point. So we are having a variety of conversations. I could go into more detail, but just to share with you one that you would not expect is we are having a very rich conversations with my friends at AGCO, which is one of the largest agricultural equipment manufacturers in the world. Because they made the observation, and I'll give them all the credit. They said, you know, your customer and our customer is the same. And so I remind people, I said, look, what we're working on, maybe if your mom works for Google and you live in Palo Alto, it's going to help, nothing bad about it. But it makes a real difference if your mom lives on a farm in Southern Illinois, right? And you're 300 miles away from Lurie's Children's. So, by the way, where is all farming occurring in the United States and globally? In all the rural areas. So my customer is their customer. This is actually a piece of work we're working with them on a joint marketing campaign. If you wondered what our rocket looks like, that's actually the rocket. That's the Pediatric Moonshot rocket. And that is a future tractor if you would like to know. I'm going to end precisely on time. I don't need to remind you guys this, but I remind people a lot of this. You know, kids are 25% of the world's population. They're 100% of our future. I do call this my last great project because I think, you know, you don't go, in fact, I'll just tell you, when I talk to my young entrepreneurial friends and they start talking about going into healthcare, I go, if you want to make money, don't go there. And if you want to make money in healthcare, don't go to pediatric healthcare. There's no money there, right? There is a mission there, and I know you all, in more ways than I have already committed yourself to that mission. I would like to invite you to join our crew. There's a number of ways you can do that. Register for our newsletter at moonshot.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've started a podcast, series of podcasts. And Han Min's actually been one of our early guests on it. And so, you know, please and share with other people. One of the keys, I think, for us, you guys may have thought about this, is that, you know, most kids are healthy, thank goodness. So most of us never think about this. As opposed to adult medicine, where all of us know somebody who has cancer or high blood pressure or whatever. And I think the world, us, need to be more informed to understand, right, why this mission is important, to all of us. So with that, I end by saying I hope you will join us in that. We think that technology, software, I was listening to the medical device guys, thinking to myself, yeah, I mean, just so you can think about it, we've already thought about how you could twin devices in the home as long as the clinic, as well as in the hospital, as well as in the research labs. In fact, there's a longer conversation that I'd love to have. We're spending a lot of time in oncology right now about how is it that you could link data between sequencing labs, research labs, children's hospitals, et cetera. Because you can tell. In fact, the Dr. Beckwith story that Han Min told me a couple of months ago is we'll call it old world example of the same thing, which is if we can link this data together, you know, we can do some pretty amazing things. And just so it's clear, we're trying to build the road. I want you guys to build the cars to drive on it, okay? So with that, thank you very much.
From the audience, and I just want to thank you. I think your talk is exactly in the right spirit of the trailblazing person that Mike is. And I think that it took somebody, quite frankly, from the outside of healthcare with the requisite skill set, and also, no disrespect, but the naivete to say, hey, this is stupid, let's make it better. Because, I think that we all say, like, this is, the CD-ROMs, which, by the way, 50% of the times don't even work, right?
Yep.
It's just ridiculous. So just thank you for that, and thank you for, coming out of retirement to lead this effort, because it's so important. So, love to get some questions from the audience.
I have a question.
Go.
So I just don't know if I get a chance to talk to you, so I'm going to ask now. So we are collecting data from Children's Hospital in India because of our project. So is there any way we could collaborate? Because we would love that. We're getting
Yes.
pathology data. Okay, so how do I talk to you?
In fact, for a whole variety of reasons, strangely enough, this India conversation's come up a lot lately. And I remind my friends who talk about this, I go, my observation is nearly every pediatric cardiologist is an Indian woman. So we're totally into, yeah, so yeah, we'd be very interested in having this conversation. We've been working in Latin America, Europe, and the US, but this only by happenstance, so.
Get a from AIMS, multiple AIMS in India. Those are the biggest government hospitals. We already have 85,000 data. That's for us, but they want us to get that data. So this will be really nice. So how do I connect? I connected on LinkedIn already. So.
Connect on LinkedIn. Hunman knows my email address. I'm on LinkedIn, everybody, if you want to reach out. And like I said, Hunman knows my email. I'm glad to connect with anybody.
Timothy, CHOU.
Oh, CKCHOU at Gmail,
Okay.
if you want email. But Timothy Joe if you want LinkedIn.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this talk. It was obviously very inspiring and also insightful. I found particularly the slide that 70% of the AI data is generated in certain parts of the US. It was impactful for a variety of reasons. I was thinking about when you mentioned Waymo and that self-driving cars in New York are going to mimic San Francisco drivers is a scary prospect. Extrapolating from that, I'm wondering what blind spots do you anticipate when data is driven by certain areas of the country that maybe has access to the exact resources that you're recognizing as important, yet some of those areas, particularly as you mentioned inequities, are the exact areas that you want to target, but those patients may not be represented in the samples in which you're extracting that data.
Well, that's the purpose of what we're doing, because I think the downside, as we all know, is if we train these systems with bias because they only sees San Francisco traffic, they're not going to work well in New York, to mix the analogies. So how do we, and that's purely what Mercury and Gemini are about, let's get these machines out there into the field, whether that's an Indian reservation or whether that's in Africa or whether that's in Willits, California. And what I've just described is we can connect every medical device, machine on the planet and make it available to drive AI applications, to drive collaboration, et cetera. Because if we don't do that, the algorithms either will not be very accurate or they'll be biased, fairly obviously. So yeah, go.
Thanks. I learn something new every time I hear you, Dr. Chou, so thank you for the inspiration. And I also have been on his podcast. I'll just say, see my name on the list up there. No, thank you for doing that, because it's really inspirational to hear what everyone else is doing. How are you choosing your rural partners, not just the children's hospitals? Are you going with this sort of system a lot of us in pediatric medicine are going with, where we have partners that are large health systems that have the children's hospitals, but then have branch smaller facilities? Some of them reach out more rural than others. Is that a way you're doing that? That was my first question. My second question is, since you and I have talked a lot about ARPA, the Gabriela Miller Kids First program under NIH, I feel like they are constantly struggling for source data that allows the rare disease research community to access stuff that they can't access now. And I say that as the mother of a child with both congenital heart disease and then a brain tumor diagnosed 3 years later. And I still get the question from many people, it's like, well, there has to be a tie there. And I'm like, well, you can talk to one doctor that says like, no, you just got struck by lightning twice, or your daughter did. And another doctor will say, there's no way that's a coincidence. But it's very hard for parents and for clinicians to find answers for families and patients like my daughter. So thank you.
Yeah, well, that's why I think we need a new road is the way we think about it. Because the current system's not going to solve that problem. To answer your question of how we're choosing, we're not at this stage really choosing rural hospitals. The only reason Howard Memorial happened is I talked to Chris and I said, Chris, who's sending you stuff? Because I need to talk to them. And so he said Howard Memorial. Luckily enough, we met Judson Howes, the CEO of Adventist Health North Coast, who loves the hell out about what we're doing. And so he's like bought in. But the plan, when I said we're trying to raise 112 million, is we'll go to all 50 states. The high likelihood, the way we'll play it is we'll go to like Lurie's in Chicago and go, Lurie's, pick 5, pick 10, right? And let's go from there, right?
Are already there for you, but even when you look again at the children's hospitals, so many of them have that hub and spoke model already, and it's really easy to have them.
Yeah. Oh, you had your hand, no.
Yeah, I almost hate to raise it because it's sort of a mundane issue, but sometimes those are the most difficult, and particularly the Mercury program, liability. So things like telehealth even have been extremely limited by liability considerations. Any second opinion service raises its own liability questions. We had a program we were trying to have visiting surgeons come into the operating room and observe and assist via a tele unit that was designed for that. Couldn't do it because of liability, interstate, legal issues. So if you run into that, and is it going to be a major obstacle for you to overcome?
I'll say
it's so mundane. I mean, this is fantastic. Clearly,
the world of healthcare does not make this easy for any of us, right? So there's multifold answer to your question. One, obviously, we're business associate agreements, DUAs, legal framework. In fact, we're working very much on how do you do federated learning agreements to establish some standard for doing that. So we very much want to work through, however you want to talk about that, the legal frameworks that are there. Obviously, as you all know better than I some of this stuff's so antiquated, like, you're in North Carolina, I can't talk to you in California. And we can't.
Just to break some of
those
antiquated practices.
We're really trying to come in bottom up and go, guys, we can do this. You can change the rules around us, right? It's kind of how I think about it. Yeah, because how it works today is dumb. Okay, I wear that with a badge of honor.
So I think, I'm sure there's lots of people that ask questions, but just to stay